When betrayal breaks into family life, the story of a marriage will become a battle for justice. Every move, every decision, and every revenge will have consequences that are impossible to foresee. This is the story of how a wife's infidelity forces the husband to take on the role of judge and enforcer of punishment. The phone didn't stop ringing, and yet it pulled me out of the clammy embrace of sleep. I sat down on the bed and looked at the device. I still had hope that someone had gotten the wrong number, but the phone kept ringing, and finally I picked it up. I'm listening. Is this Dima? It was the manager of the Bronze Age Club where I worked on weekends. Yeah, there's a businessman looking for you. He wants you and the guys to play at his anniversary party. He's a fan of Soviet rock and roll from the 70s. He says he'll pay good money. Where are they celebrating? Out of town. The motel's an old castle. Can you make it? My wife's out of town with her parents and won't be back for a while. My daughter's staying with mine. I'm on my own now, so why not? You can't have too much money. What time should we get there? He said 7:00 p.m. Okay, I'll be there. They hung up on me. I turned on the turntable and put on a record. Then I poured myself a whiskey. No sooner had I had a drink than the front doorbell rang. Without getting dressed, I went to the door and looked through the peephole. A uniformed messenger stood on a landing. He was holding an envelope. When I opened the door, without even asking my name, he silently handed it to me and turned and started down the stairs. I locked the door and went into the kitchen. I poured ground Italian coffee into a clay pot, added water, and put it on the stove. And then I opened the envelope. A brightly decorated card and a small stack of neatly folded green dollars. I counted out exactly 500. On the card, gold on a red background was rubbed on the invitation. Inside it was handwritten. It was a deposit. The fee is twice as much. Expect you by 7 p.m. at the Old Castle Motel and the date. I shrugged. $1.50, that's not bad at all. With a cup of coffee in hand, I went back to the room, changed the record, and settled into the chair. I listened to the song and drank my coffee, admiring a collection of vintage Soviet guitars hanging on the wall. I had a lot to think about. My wife Svetlana and I had been married for almost 15 years. I was in my early 30s when I met her at someone's anniversary party. That evening I was playing with the guys, providing musical accompaniment, and Svetlana was among the invitees. She stood out in the faceless crowd of chewing and drinking guests. She and I danced a few times, and I gave her a ride home after the anniversary. Sveta was 3 years younger than me. She rented a room in a bedroom community. We sat in the car for a long time, and I finally got up the courage to kiss her. She didn't resist, and then I suggested we go to my place. After a little thought, she agreed. We drank wine, listened to music, and moved on to more serious physical exercise. That's how she came into my life. Sveta had a very valuable quality. She knew how to be in the right place at the right time. And soon I couldn't imagine my life without her. We met for about 3 months and came to the conclusion that we should get married. We got married in September. We didn't do anything fancy. Friends, parents, and close family. 3 years later, our daughter was born. I worked at the factory as an engineer, and on weekend evenings played in a small cozy club, the Bronze Age. I managed in my youth the fate of the Institute of Mechanical Engineering in parallel to finish in music school, and now music helped me to survive. I gathered a small team, and we played Soviet rock and roll in the 70s. It turned out that there were quite a few fans of such music in our city, and on weekends, the club was full of old rockers. They listened to covers of forgotten bands with pleasure, drinking strong drinks to wash down their nostalgia. Sveta was engaged in landscape design. She designed plots for wealthy clients who had no desire to do it themselves. Over time, she became quite famous and in demand. Along with fame, the number and duration of business trips increased. But I was confident in my wife. During all the years of our life together, she gave no reason to doubt her love and fidelity. Our family's standard of living was above average. We had enough money to live and have fun. Like any self-respecting man, I had a stash. A week ago, I learned that the owners were going to go to live abroad and urgently want to sell the club Bronze Age at a fairly low price. I did not hesitate to borrow money from my parents. With the help of my father, took a loan from the banks, added everything I had, and bought it. I registered the purchase on my father's name. He was a pensioner and had significant tax benefits. Svetlana knew nothing about it. I decided to wait for her and celebrate our acquisition. At the same time, to consult with my wife, how to be further, to leave the work at the plant and tightly engaged in the club, or to continue to try to sit on 2 chairs. After lunch, I called the guys and asked them to come to the motel a little early to set up and check out the equipment. Then I called my wife, but her cell phone was off. Okay, I'll call her back later. It must be dead. I changed my clothes. I put on a light navy blue shirt, jeans, and lightweight high-heeled cowboy boots. A rocker's dream in the 70s. Checked my guitar, chords, microphone. I try to work with my gear to eliminate any surprises. At 6:45, I was already in the car and driving out of the yard. I knew the road and planned to be there on time. I parked with difficulty in the parking lot packed with expensive cars, and taking a tool and a bag of cords, went to the entrance of the motel. The doorman at the entrance quickly opened the door, saying that Jubilee had asked for me several times. Walking up to the stage, I made sure the guys had everything plugged in, and we were ready to begin. A young man came up to me, wearing a fancy suit. "Hi, I'm the host. You'll be performing first. How do I announce you?" "Just announce it. The band Ricochet. Bronze Age music. We'll take it from there." The young man made a notation in his notebook and disappeared instantly. He was immediately replaced by another. "Pavel Yurievich asks you to approach him." I approached a small group of men who were seated in an informal manner. One of them stood up and extended his hand to me. "Hello, Dmitri. Thank you for coming. I'm waiting for my friend, and I'll ask you, when she and I enter the hall, to play Autumn by Vladimir Reaction. It's her favorite song. Not just hers. My Svetka also loves the theme," I thought. "Well, and then you play according to your program. The Jubilee has finished." "Okay, don't worry, we'll do everything properly." I nodded my head and went up to the stage again. "Guys, first we play Autumn, then Rumba, and further down the list." I picked up my guitar and adjusted the microphone. Suddenly, everyone stopped talking and turned to the entrance. The Jubilee entered the hall, leading by the hand a blonde young woman in a gorgeous purple dress, sewn exactly to her figure. A well-dressed, gray-haired man in years and a young, graceful woman looked at him lovingly. How great the couple looked. And at that moment, in the companion of the Jubilee, I recognized my wife. My fingers played the introduction and I sang. I sang on automatic. My voice was distorted by the equipment, and the lights didn't recognize it. About something sweetly in our cue, the couple walked to their place at the table, and the guests, looking at them, also began to be seated. I finished singing, and there was silence in the hall. "Gentlemen," the voice of the Jubilee amplified the microphone in his hand. "It's already a year since we are together. Today, my beloved woman gave her consent to become my wife." He took a blue box from the table and took out a ring. Judging by the way the reflected light shone on it, there were enough diamonds. "In honor of the occasion, accept, my beloved, this gift." He put the ring on the ring finger of Sveta's right hand, on the same place where she had worn my wedding ring until recently. Apparently, Pavel Yurievich decided to combine 2 events, his 60th birthday and engagement. Sveta stood up and kissed her future husband on the lips. The guests applauded. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming. It's just a dream. Now I'm going to wake up and all of this will disappear. I even closed my eyes. Alas, the anniversary continued. What should I do? Go up and punch the birthday boy in the face? That's stupid. It's not like he had anything to do with it. What would I accomplish? I'd be thrown out, that's all. Punching Svetki in the shameless face would have the exact same ending. All right, I'm gonna watch this show to the end. The host has arrived on stage. Gentlemen, we have the band Ricochet, with a program of music of the Bronze Age. The lights were dimmed in the hall, and the projector illuminated the stage, and then Sveta recognized me. I could clearly see her hand pressed to her throat. Her companion leaned over to her and then said something to the waiter. A few seconds later, he brought a glass of water. Yeah, looks like the bride's in a bad way. We've played the section. All this time, Sveta didn't take her eyes off the stage. She tried to get up several times, but then sat back down. Her bow never left her side, hovering, so to speak, like a fly over shit. When we finished to the applause of the guests and began to collect the equipment, the host handed me an envelope with money. Pavel Yurievich is very pleased. He will contact you again, but it's unlikely. I threw the guitar on my shoulder and approached Svetlana. She was sitting alone. Her companion had gone out. When my wife saw me, she lowered her eyes. They asked me to tell you. I threw my wedding ring into the champagne glass in front of her, then turned around, picked up my bag, and went to the exit. The car started with half a turn. The engine rumbled quietly like a hungry cat on sour cream. Sveta, how could you? A cold emptiness spilled inside me, flooding the raging emotions. I slowly backed up, turned around, and drove onto the empty highway. How long had they been together? Almost a year. All this time, my wife had been pretending, lying to me, living on two families, and finally marrying her lover. Well, Svetka, the landscape designer. Apparently, Pavel Yurievich liked my wife's landscaping so much that he got married. I wonder if he knows that he's married with a child. I thought about my daughter, and my heart ached painfully. What will happen to Zhenya? How will she survive all this? These thoughts gave me a headache. All right, enough with the snot. What happened, happened. We have to solve problems as they come. As soon as I crossed the threshold of my apartment, my cell phone rang. Dima. My wife's voice brought me back to reality. Are you home? I was silent. Hello, Dima. My wife was already yelling. Can you hear me? Don't yell. I can hear you. I tried to speak calmly. Dima, we need to talk. Can I come in the morning? In the voice of Light appeared begging notes. I disconnected the phone. Come, Light, let's talk, though what about? And her lies, about duplicity, about betrayal at last. I sincerely did not understand why it was so. What was she missing? All these years, I loved her. Maybe not hysterical, ostentatious love, but that real with sincere feelings, which is alien to show and play for publicity. Where did I make a mistake? How did I offend my wife? After all, there was no refusal of Light in anything. Despite the fact that we did not have a lot of money, I did everything to my beloved, did not need anything. Yes, and she understood that. At least I thought she did. I remember how the Light persuaded me to have another child, saying that at some point, Geneva may be alone because we are not forever. We discussed the pros and cons for a long time, and came to the conclusion that a second child is necessary. At the same time, my wife was having an affair with someone else, preparing the ground for a cuckoo. I had a terrible headache. My heart wasn't pounding anymore. It was thundering, occasionally falling down. I wanted to call my daughter, but I realized in time it was late. Why bother the child? Well, we'll live till morning. That night, I didn't sleep much. My heart was crawling in my throat and stomach. I even thought of calling an ambulance. But then I decided I'd get over it. Around 9 a.m., I heard the click of the front door and realized that the Light had arrived. I know it was a mean thing to do, but I'd fallen in love, truly fallen in love. Began her monologue, my still wife. I can't help it. This feeling is stronger than me. I listened to her in silence and looked out the window. It was snowing, which is typical for the beginning of March. I stood up and closed the window. I had made up my mind. I couldn't imagine us together anymore. At some point, I suddenly realized that light was just unpleasant for me. Living with a woman who has cheated on you, betrayed you, is almost like picking up an ashtray with other people's cigarette butts. I even felt a twinge of disgust. You've done so much for me, for our family. I appreciate it, but I can't help it. The light continued her monologue. I had the impression that she had learned these common phrases in advance. Sveta, don't waste your time. I understood everything about love and that it is stronger than you. I interrupted her outpouring. I just have one question. What about Zhenya? Will you take her to the new daddy? Svetlana was silent. Then she looked at me pitifully. I'd like Zhenya to stay with you. We are going with Pasha to Italy. He has villa there, and she has school and friends here. I don't want to tear her away from her place. Let her finish her studies. Anyway, the light lowered her eyes so she wouldn't have to look at me. It's clear. He doesn't want someone else's child around him. And for the sake of this asshole to give up his own daughter. Oh, Light, what passion does to a man. Only yesterday, you were a loving mother and a model wife. Okay, the husband, a stranger, in fact, a man, a potential enemy, as some loving wives say. But your daughter, your own little blood, how could you do that to her? I realized it was time to end this conversation. Are you going to get your things? No, I want to start my life over, leaving nothing behind. Wow, that's a nice way of putting it. I guess me and my daughter are old stuff too. Well, fair wins. They got us out quickly, no questions asked. Walking out of the courthouse and seeing my ex-wife kissing her Pasha and getting into the car, I caught myself thinking that at this very moment I was losing a part of my soul. Sad. Zhenya calmly, without much emotion, took the departure of her mother to another man. I expected hysterics, crying, or some lamentations. But she just looked at me with eyes full of tears and said, Dad, I only asked you one thing. Let's remember it for the rest of our lives, so that we never forgave her. That same evening, my daughter collected all our family photos with Svetlana in the house and threw them down the garbage chute. 2 years passed. I quit my job and devoted myself fully to the club. My idea of vintage Soviet rock and roll paid off. Already in 6 months, the club began to bring income. As an administrator, I took Natasha, a pretty young woman, a little over 30, with good business acumen. After a while, she suggested inviting to us well-known rock bands in the past. But there was a problem. Our hall was small and could not accommodate all comers. I considered all the pros and cons and decided to buy the entire building where the club was located. Having taken a loan from the bank and investing the money saved for 6 months, I realized my decision. Soon my home collection of vintage guitars moved into the club, giving the interior a proper vintage feel. On the second floor, I was going to make a small office and a one-room apartment for myself. I was going to give my apartment to my daughter. In general, things got better, and in 3 months the renewed club, the Bronze Age, opened its doors for fans of Soviet vintage rock and roll. Gradually, the pain of my wife's betrayal dulled, and there came a time when I stopped remembering Sveta. Where she was and what about her no longer interested me. I tried to get pleasure from insignificant at first glance things. Long ago, back in my childhood, my mother insured me for 500 rubles until I came of age. And when the time came to get insurance, my mom said that I could buy myself anything I wanted. At that moment, my most cherished wish was to play in an ensemble. But alas, I didn't have an instrument, and no one was particularly eager to take a guitarist without a guitar. Naturally, I wanted a guitar. My mother and I went to a department store, and I bought an electric guitar from the Borisov factory. It was with it that my career as a musician began. Then I had different instruments. But I treasured my first guitar very much. But alas, it was lost in time, and when I tried to find it, it disappeared. I searched my parents' apartment, but I never found it. One day, my father called me and told me that there was some old guitar lying in the garage and what he should do with it. Half an hour later, I was at his place. It was her. My first guitar, my mom's first guitar. I was dizzy with joy. I went back to the club, plugged it into the amp, and it started playing. If you want something badly enough, eventually the wish will come true. I put my first guitar in my study so that it would constantly remind me of my youth and the beginning of my musical career. Summer came unnoticed. Genya went to a youth camp for 2 weeks. Then she and I decided to go to the sea. My daughter grew up and turned into a charming girl. Many guys turned their heads when she and I walked through the city. I do not hide me as a father was pleased, but deep down I felt jealousy and longing that the time would come and my daughter would leave me. The laws of nature are inexorable. While Genya was away, I moved into the club and settled into my new home. Things were going well. The administrator Natasha was doing a great job. But I began to notice that her attitude towards me had changed. She was seriously interested in me. I could see it in everything. First of all, she became friends with Genya. Her daughter began to show at the club, often to have a chat with Natasha. In the mornings, I began to drink natural coffee with homemade pastries. As I found out later, Natasha had bought a coffee machine with her own money. And finally, homemade cutlets appeared in my diet. I used to think that nobody knows how to make cutlets except my mother. But I was wrong. The cutlets that Natasha treated me with were a masterpiece of culinary art. Yes, time goes by, but the methods of charming men do not change. The way to their heart of steel goes through the stomach, and Natasha perfectly used this timeless feminine technique. She did not hurry, did not impose her society on me, did not bore me with conversations. But I felt myself being sucked in more and more by Natasha's comfort. One warm summer evening, I sat in my office. There was no hurry. The apartment was 5 meters away. I had been planning to have a drink since morning, and the whole day was filled with anticipation of this important event for any man. I poured half a glass of amber drink and suddenly thought about the light. Just a thought. I didn't care about her current life. Just a thought, and I immediately forgot about it. But no sooner had I enjoyed a single malt whiskey than my cell phone compulsively beeped. Frankly, I had the urge to throw it against the wall. But I resettled myself and answered the call. Hello. There was silence in the receiver, but I could hear someone's breathing. Hello, speak. Dima? The woman's voice was very familiar. Sveta. I'm listening. Go ahead. I still managed to sip my whiskey that I was inveighing all day in anticipation. Dima, just don't hang up. I really need to meet you. I can come over. Svetlana's voice was quiet, ingratiating, begging. Right now. Yes, I'm begging you. Okay, come over. I'm at the club right now. The main thing is, no emotions. I blacked out. My ex-wife showed up in all her glory. A modest but insanely expensive dress, flesh-colored stockings, stiletto shoes, smoky glasses, half a face. And to top off this mind-blowing outfit was a hat. Light turned out to be a model, descended from the cover of a glamorous magazine. But she didn't look happy. She sat opposite me, with her head down, all her appearance, expressing humility and submission. Dima, I understand, you can't forgive such a thing. But still I ask you to forgive me. There was not a single day that I did not think about you. Her eyes began to fill with tears. I've done a terrible thing. I have betrayed you, our family, our daughter. She told me that the love frenzy didn't last long. Her Pasha had a new girlfriend, much younger than Sveta. Pasha for some time lived on 2 families and then offered Sveta to vacate the living space. True, he provided his former friend with some money. Sveta was upset, but not for long. She has a new admirer, an Italian who owns a gas station. Not very glamorous, but he's a fish out of water. They broke out in a mad passion, and Sveta thought it would last forever. It did indeed last forever. A whole month, until Sveta ran out of money. But she wasn't upset. The gas station was a good income too. But then it turned out that her Italian had no desire to support a Russian beauty at his expense. Very greedy, these foreigners. In general, Sveta was once again asked to vacate the apartment. And then Sveta remembered that she had a husband and a daughter. Not strangers at all. Koya had scraped together the money for a ticket, and here she was to reunite with her family. She continued to talk, and I looked at my once favorite woman in silence. The woman who without hesitation cynically betrayed me. The one who had lied to me for a year while living with me and my lover. The woman who cut me and my wife out of her life and left me for another man. And now she's come to her senses and wants to come back to me. I'm sorry. She kept saying that word over and over. And I looked at her brightly colored lipstick-covered mouth, which delighted my ears with such sweet words, and imagined her kissing and caressing her lovers with it. She didn't care so much about my feelings that she didn't hesitate to tell me about her Italian love adventures, much without thinking how she was killing me with her words. Did she really think I would believe her words for a second? That she was confused, that she didn't know what she wanted. 2 years ago, she found an excuse for her meanness, and she didn't hesitate to leave me and my daughter. And now she is here, not because she really realized that she loves her family, but because she realizes that now she has no one to provide for her financially. After realizing all this, Sveta came to me, hoping to try to regain what she had lost. Holy crap. Am I really so stupid that I'm willing to believe her lies? I remembered what I said to Jenny 2 years ago. Dad, there's only one thing I ask of you. Let's remember this for the rest of our lives so that we never forgive her. Sveta, I interrupted her heart-wrenching monologue. You're an adult, and you chose your own path. You can't step into the same river twice. I have long forgiven you, but I have my own life, in which there is no place for you. I stood up, showing that the conversation was over. Goodbye, and try to be happy. Sveta left, holding a handkerchief to her eyes. In the office for some time flew the scent of her perfume. I finished my whiskey, put on my jacket, and headed for the door, since it was time to open the club, and it was time to rock and roll.